Welcome to Cat Has Questions, curiosity, stories, and the strange corners of everyday life. Hello, I'm your host, Kat, and today we're going to Australia. Sorry, that was terrible. To a quiet stretch of beach, to a perfectly dressed man found sitting upright in the sand, as if he'd simply decided to take a rest. Except he was dead. And somehow, over the next 75 years, this case would become one of the strangest mysteries ever recorded. A man with no ID, no labels on his clothes, a secret code, a rare book, and a phrase in Persian, meaning it is finished, in a trail that links to espionage, poison, a mysterious nurse, and quite possibly a child who had no idea he may have been at the center of an international secret. This is the Somerton Man. This is one of the few cases where every time I think I finally understand it, something else ruins my entire theory. Okay, let's get into it. Let's go to Somerton Beach in Australia, December 1st, 1948. It's the kind of morning where everything feels slightly too quiet, a little too still, like the air hasn't fully woken up yet. In walking along the beach is a couple out for an early stroll, just minding their own business, enjoying the view, doing what people did before phones existed, which I assume was, talking, looking at the water? I don't know. And that's when they see him, a man sitting upright against a low seawall. His posture is almost weirdly composed, back straight, legs outstretched out in front of him, ankles crossed, arms relaxed, not slumped over, not distressed, just sitting. The couple does what any of us would do. They glance, mentally shrug, and keep walking. Someone eventually checks his pulse, and nothing. They look at his face. Pale, still, peaceful, but wrong. This is where the story should get straightforward. A sad situation, a man who passed away on the beach. But nope. The Somerton Man said, absolutely not. Welcome to the chaos. Because when police arrive and begin searching his pockets, they immediately realize something is off. There's no ID, no wallet, and every single clothing label has been cut out of his clothes. Cut. Neatly, intentionally, with precision. His clothes themselves are nice. They're quality fabric, they're clean, ironed, not worn out, and his shoes are even polished, not beach stroll polished. Nothing about him matches his environment. Just a very put-together man in a very not put-together situation. Inside his pockets, investigators find a train ticket to Henley Beach, which was unused, a bus ticket to Glenelg, which was used, chewing gum, cigarettes, matches, and honestly, not much else. And again, absolutely nothing that tells them who he is. His hair is neatly combed. His face is cleanly shaven. He doesn't look like a drifter or someone down on their luck. He looks like a man who cared about how he presented himself. So why on earth would someone like that remove every label from their clothes? You do that when you don't want people to know where you're from. It's already giving spy energy. So this is when things start to get even more interesting. Multiple witnesses later came forward saying they had seen him the night before he was found, lying in the same spot. People remember seeing him move like he was alive. Another remembered thinking the man was drunk or sick, but just resting at the time. Which means if people saw him alive that night, he died overnight in a public place without anyone realizing it. But no one saw anyone with him. No one saw a struggle. No one saw someone leave him there. So the scene itself, police pay extra attention to the sand around him. There are no signs of a struggle, no drag marks, no scuffle, no footprints suggesting someone set him there and ran off. Nothing. It looks like he just sat down and never got back up. It feels like someone wanted him to be found but not identified. So investigators immediately floated the classic theories. Maybe a heart attack, a stroke, alcohol poisoning, overdose, suicide. But none of these matched the scene. There's no vomit, no sign of distress, no contorted facial expression, no evidence he had been rolling around or trying to get up. He's just composed. And the more investigators look at him, the more the questions start piling up. because they can't find literally anything wrong with him. No injuries, no bruising, nothing that screams trauma. If he was poisoned, it wasn't violent, it was very quiet. And now the police are officially baffled. The public reaction to this was a lot. The local press picks up the story fast because that isn't something that happens in Adelaide every day. This is a quiet, calm beach town. Mysterious men in suits showing up dead without identification, not exactly common. So the public starts coming to the morgue, hoping they might recognize him. People who lost family members or friends, people who think he might be someone missing from another town. And the morgue attendants say the same thing over and over again. Everyone who sees him says the same thing. He looks familiar, but I cannot place him. And if this case is about one thing, it's about dots that refuse to be connected. Because investigators assumed someone would eventually come forward, a friend, a spouse, a coworker, literally anybody, they embalmed the Somerton Man, which ended up being one of the best decisions in the entire case. Because without that, the DNA testing in 2022 would have been impossible. At this point, we're at the autopsy, and this is where things take a sharp left turn out of maybe this was a natural death and sprints full speed into absolutely not. The medical examiner, John Cleland, begins going through the Somerton Man's body and almost immediately starts raising his eyebrows like he's watching a plot twist unfold in real time. Because on the outside, he's a totally normal-looking man. He's healthy, middle-aged. He has no visible wounds or bruising. But on the inside, his body tells a completely different story. The contents of his stomach are examined first. This is classic autopsy protocol, and here's what they find. No alcohol was found, no irritants like you'd see in vomiting, no violently acidic signs from drugs like barbiturates. But certain signs were consistent with poisoning. And this is where things get frustrating. Because the examiner sees things he recognizes and symptoms he knows, but he cannot prove any of it. So he writes that the congestion in the man's stomach, kidneys, and brain suggest poisoning, something that shuts down your body quietly, without drama, and disappears quickly inside the bloodstream. But this is 1948, if you remember. They did not have tests to identify many of these compounds, especially not rare ones used in espionage and specialized poisonings. So basically, he's saying in the most professional medical language possible, I'm 99% sure this dude was poisoned, but 0% able to prove it scientifically. Love that for us, and I love that for this investigation. One of the strangest physical details that gets glossed over in quick retellings of this story, the Somerton Man had calves like a trained dancer or runner. The muscles are extremely well developed, not like a hobby jogger, me. This becomes important because people in espionage-related roles sometimes had this exact musculature. He looks like a man who worked with his mind, not his body, and yet had legs of someone who trained physically. So let's talk about his outfit now. As I mentioned also, there were no labels in anything, all carefully removed with scissors. His jacket had American-style stitching, something not made in Australia at the time. So the options are, he traveled to America, he bought it from someone who traveled to America, or he was American. Several days after the body was found, police receive a tip. A suitcase had been sitting unclaimed at the Adelaide train station since the day before the man was discovered. The timing fits perfectly, the location fits perfectly, and when investigators open it, the contents get even stranger. So people are starting to think this suitcase must be that man's. So inside the suitcase, they find a red dressing gown, a pair of trousers that also has the label removed, a screwdriver, a table knife sharpened into a very fine point, a pair of scissors cut in a strange pattern, a shaving brush, a singlet, a laundry bag marked with the name Keane, so Kean, an undershirt marked Keane but spelled Keane, so same name but spelled differently. The thread was a very unusual type that was not available in Australia, and a coat with the same American-style stitching, so another jacket that looked like it was made in America. So the suitcase, like I mentioned, had 2 items marked with the name Keane. Investigators thought, oh, finally, a lead, it's a name. But they found no missing person with that name, spelled either way. No tailors were called the name, no records matched, and experts believe the name was planted because those labels were not cut out like all of his others. In other words, they think someone intentionally left the wrong name in the suitcase to throw off the investigation. There was also in the suitcase stenciling tools. the kind used to label cargo, crates, or equipment. Not the kind used by like painters. It's not like arts and crafts stencils. These are utilitarian, so they're used by merchant marines, industrial workers, military logistics workers, or people who need to mark untraceable shipments. The kind of people who move through ports unseen. It's not conclusive, but it suggests that the Somerton Man's life touched international shipping or military supply chains. So it's all kind of coming together with like, somehow he's moving internationally, which again lands squarely in possible intelligence work. And with that, the investigators have, so far, a dead man with no cause of death, but maybe poisoning, a perfectly staged-looking body, no ID, no labels, a suitcase of weirdly modified tools, a false name, American materials, and absolutely no one coming forward to claim him. The case is officially starting to slip out of crime investigation territory and slide into, am I living in a spy novel? But the next discovery all starts with a little tiny pocket. A forensic officer examining the Somerton Man's trousers finds something unusual. A pocket sewn into the lining of his pants. Not a normal pocket, not like a little manufacturer's pocket, it's a secret pocket. A custom-made, deliberately added little compartment that you would never know existed unless you examined the garment carefully. This is not, I like a little extra storage, I need somewhere to put my keys. This is, I need to hide something. And inside the secret pocket, rolled up so tightly, it looks almost like a tiny scroll. It's a little scrap of paper, and on it are printed 2 words, Tamam Shud. So what does Tamam Shud mean? The little scrap of paper is not handwritten, and it's not from like a magazine or a newspaper. The font is printed like it's from a book. The words themselves come from Persian, and they translate into, it is finished or the end. Investigators quickly identify that the phrase comes from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of poems that was extremely popular in the early 20th century. But it's not exactly mass-produced in Australia. It's a pretty philosophical book, themes about death, existence, finality, lots of deep, what is life vibes. So the fact that a man is found dead with, it is finished, physically rolled up into a hidden pocket in his clothes, now the problem becomes, okay, where is the actual book that this little piece of paper came from? The scrap isn't torn roughly. It looks like it was neatly removed from a page, like someone carefully cut it out. So police start searching bookstores, libraries, homes, anything they can think of. Nothing. Then, weeks later, completely randomly, a man walks into the police station with a beat-up copy of the Rubaiyat and says, this was in my car and I have no idea how it got there. And investigators are like, I'm sorry, what now? Because here's the thing. This man says he keeps his car locked. He doesn't know when it was placed there, and no one saw anything. And inside the book, they find the exact spot where the scrap was ripped out of. A perfect match. This is honestly one of the most bizarre moments in the entire case. Someone placed that book there intentionally. Someone chose that car, and someone wanted the book, and therefore that clue to be found. But they did not want to be seen. So now investigators are holding a rare book with the missing page, and inside of it are 2 huge clues, a phone number and a string of weird letters, potentially a code. And suddenly we have a whole new cast of characters about to enter the story. All right, so clue number 1 is a phone number. So the phone number that was written in the book. This phone number leads to a woman named Jessica Thompson, often called Jo, but we are saving her deep dive for later in the story because that is its own beast. For now, all you need to know is this woman lived just minutes from where the Somerton Man's body was found. And when police show her his face, she reacts in a way that absolutely no one has ever forgotten. Clue number 2, inside the book, faintly written in pencil, in several lines of letters arranged almost like poetry. Not words, not standard ciphertext. Literally just a bunch of letters in a row. I'm not going to read all these letters because there's kind of a lot of them, but cipher experts from all over the world have tried to solve it. No one can crack the code. There's no pattern, there's no known structure. The prevailing theory among code breakers today is that this isn't a cipher in the traditional sense at all. It's most likely an acrostic, which means each letter stands for the first letter of a word in a sentence. The Somerton Man's message is likely the same thing, a personal mnemonic shorthand. And if this is indeed what it is, the code is basically unbreakable. You cannot solve an acrostic without knowing what the letters refer to, which means If the Somerton Man wrote the code and he took the meaning with him, this code will never be deciphered. In this code, one line of letters is scribbled over, like someone wrote something and then changed their mind. Why? What did that line say? Did he rewrite it? Did someone else rewrite it? We have no idea. And that crossed out line bothers me so much because you know that was something. If they crossed it out, there's a reason. It's like when someone says, oh, never mind, that doesn't matter. And you immediately want to know what it was and that it matters. The book itself had two things that freaked investigators out. One was an impression on the back page, meaning someone had written something on the page that is missing, maybe additional codes, maybe notes, maybe something else. There's also sand in the crease, which suggests the book had been on the beach at some point. This ties the book physically to the location of the body. And combine that with the secret pocket scrap. So why does this Tamam Shud scrap matter? People always ask, why would someone hide a scrap of poetry in a secret pocket? So here are the main theories investigators still argue over to this day. Theory 1 is that a suicide note with plausible deniability. So Tamam Shud, meaning it is finished, is a very on the nose for someone ending their life. But then you look at the removal of the labels, the strange travel, the hidden pocket, the weird tools in his suitcase. And yeah, it just doesn't fit. Suicide makes some sense, but not enough. Theory 2, a message to someone else. So a final signal, a job done, a mission over, very espionage coded. And then theory 3 about the scrap. Someone else planted it on him. This is unsettling, but possible. If someone killed him, staged him, and wanted the investigation to spiral into confusion. So let's circle back. At this point in the investigation, police now have a dead man with no labels, no ID, no identification anywhere. A suitcase full of odd items, a hidden pocket, a scrap of paper saying it is finished, a rare book containing a phone number and a possible indecipherable code, a connection to a woman nearby, and absolutely zero narrative that makes sense. And now we're going to get into more of the human side of this case. Because when investigators call the phone number written inside the book, if you remember Joe, our girl Joe, the entire tone of this case changes. That phone call leads to a woman whose reaction becomes almost as famous as the mystery itself. So now investigators have a rare poetry book with a phone number penciled inside. They dial it up, and someone picks up. And this is the moment the story stops being just mysterious and becomes something else. So the number belongs to a woman named Jessica Thompson. She is a nurse. She lives in Glenelg, a short walk from the beach where the Somerton Man's body was found. She's in her mid-20s. She's pretty. She's soft-spoken with a warm demeanor. Exactly the kind of person you would not expect to be anywhere near a bizarre mystery like this. But when investigators show up at her house, Joe acts weird. 2 detectives arrive at her small brick house. She opens the door politely. They ask if she's ever owned a copy of the Rubaiyat, and she says yes. She gave one to a man named Alfred Boxall a few years back. But then they show her a plaster cast of the Somerton Man's face, which also, I know that used to be a thing more than it is now, but plaster casts of people's face is just kind of creepy. Are they carrying that around in their car? Okay, anyways. This is where every single detective in the room suddenly goes alert, because Joe's reaction is not normal. Not, oh no, I don't recognize him at all. Not confused, not neutral, no. The moment she sees his face, she gasps. She steps backwards, her knees buckle slightly like she might faint, and her entire body language screams, I know him. But then she regains her composure very fast and says, nope, I don't know who that is. Ma'am, you can't have a full physical breakdown and then immediately act like, oh, nope, actually, everything's fine. I haven't seen him. Her reaction is so strong that investigators literally note it in their official report. They described it as shocked, taken aback, alarmed, and possibly distressed. And not in the, this is traumatic way, in the, I know something and I'm trying not to say it way. She denied knowing the Somerton Man for the rest of her life. She never once budged from that position. But here's the thing. Investigators didn't believe her in 1948, and people still do not believe her now. The more you learn about her, the stranger this gets. So remember she told police she once gave the book to a man named Alfred Boxall, a copy of the Rubaiyat. That's important because Boxall was found alive. He's not our beach guy, and he still has that copy of the Rubaiyat. And hers had an inscription in it written in her handwriting. So Joe gave the same edition of this obscure book to 2 different men. Why? Why this book? Why these men? Investigators have wondered for decades what her connection was to this text and why she had any association to a dead man carrying a torn scrap from the same book. This is the kind of coincidence that is so specific, it kind of stops being a coincidence. Joe's personal life was complicated. Joe had a young son named Robin, born around the same time as Somerton Man would have been in her life. She was living with a man who was not Robin's biological father, but on the outside, everything looked normal, except Robin didn't resemble his legal father in the slightest. His features were distinct and very specific, and this does become important. So the Somerton Man had two rare physical features. He had a unique ear shape, and he also had a rare congenital dental condition. And Robin, Joe's son, had these exact same two traits. To explain how rare these traits are, they occur in less than 2% of the population, sometimes lower. This is not a casual resemblance. This is the kind of overlap geneticists see and go, oh yeah, that's a parent-child match. And no one in Robin's father's family had either of those features. But the Somerton Man did. The likelihood of this being random is practically zero. So let's say what we're all thinking. The strongest modern theory is that the Somerton Man was Robin's biological father, which means Joe knew him, knew the child was his, and lied to the police, and continued lying for decades. Again, why? Why would she panic when seeing his face? And why would she never admit to knowing him, even when doing so could have solved everything? There are a few possibilities. Theory 1 is that she's protecting her reputation. A single mother in the late 1940s admitting to an affair? Not ideal for the time period. But this does not explain the book, the code, the hidden pocket, the labels removed, the suitcase, the mysterious cause of death. There's clearly something bigger happening. It's not just a simple, affair that she had a kid out of wedlock. Theory 2 is that she was afraid. Not scared of being judged afraid, but scared of the people involved. Like if she talked, she knew something would happen. This is a very popular theory. Theory 3 is that she was involved in intelligence work as well. And yes, this one has actual evidence behind it. And here's why. Joe spoke fluent Russian. It was during the Cold War, and she refused to ever explain how she learned Russian or how she knew Russian. So she was the perfect person to be a contact, messenger, or associate for someone passing through the country on intelligence business. One theory that researchers love is that the Somerton Man wasn't the only suspicious man in Joe's orbit. There was another man, likely Alfred Boxall, the one she gave the book to, who had some kind of relationship with her in the mid-1940s. Boxall worked in military engineering. He had clearances. He had ties to defense projects. Some believe Joe knew two men. One was Boxall, one was the Somerton Man, and both were tied to intelligence work. And she may have served as a contact point or intermediary. So a more human theory of these three people is a love triangle. So maybe two men loved Joe, one was the father of her child. The other, possibly Boxall, received the same book as a romantic gift. Joe could have been involved with both. This theory usually ends in the idea that the Somerton Man came to find Joe. But again, this does not explain the spy-level weirdness of the case, unless the romance and the intelligence overlap, which they absolutely could. Could be a little mix of both of those things. At the end of the day, here's what really sticks with people. Jo Thompson was the key to this mystery. She reacted like someone who knew him. She shut down. She hid something. She never admitted anything, even on her deathbed. Her daughter later said Jo told her cryptically, "The truth will never be known," which is not the kind of thing you say when your connection to a dead man is innocent. Jo went to her grave with a secret, and whatever she knew died with her. So what does this leave us? A questionable woman, a child with identical rare features, physical clues pointing to espionage, and the strongest emotional reaction in the case coming from the person who denied knowing him. We are at the part of the story where everything is spiraling and yet somehow feels like it fits together, except it doesn't. Not neatly, not cleanly. Because if you think this is confusing, DNA testing is about to enter the chat. After decades of dead ends, false leads, conspiracy theories, spy theories, romance theories, the world finally got a breakthrough. And it shockingly came from a single hair. A tiny fragment of hair that had survived for 70 plus years because the Somerton Man was embalmed and then later stored in a plaster cast made for display. This hair preserved inside that cast became the key. Enter Professor Derek Abbott, a genealogist who had been obsessed with this case for years, like full-time, obsessive, we're going to solve this even if it ruins me energy. He does what genealogists do. He compares DNA to databases, he builds family trees, he follows every branch until something clicks. And finally, in 2022, something does. A compelling DNA match points directly to a man named Carl Charles Webb, born in 1905, an electrical engineer from Melbourne. And suddenly, headlines explode. Somerton Man identified after 74 years. Australia's greatest mystery solved. And case closed, we know his name. But here's the thing I want you to understand. DNA gave us a name, but it did not give us answers. In fact, it raised even more questions. So who was Charles Webb? Let's talk about him. Charles Webb was the last of 6 children. He grew up in a normal Australian family, trained as an electrical engineer, and married a woman named Dorothy. They had no known children. Their marriage was complicated, not unusual for the time, and eventually Dorothy left him, filing for legal separation. After that, Charles Webb disappears from the historical record. No employment records, no travel logs, no confirmed sightings. His trail goes cold until a man is found dead on Somerton Beach. So does Webb match the physical clues? Some parts fit, some don't. He did have the same rare genetic markers seen in the Somerton Man, and that's the whole reason, obviously, the DNA pointed to him. His age lines up perfectly. Webb would have been in his early 40s, which would be a match. His occupation as an electrical engineer fits the technical mind profile, the weird tools, the stenciling gear. But then we hit contradictions. Why was he in Adelaide? He lived in Melbourne. He had 0 known ties to Adelaide. He arranged no lodging. And his only known action there was ending up dead on a beach. That doesn't really make any sense. Unless he was going to see someone very specific like Joe. One of the strongest theories, even before the DNA breakthrough, was that the Somerton Man fathered Joe's son, Robin. This was based on the rare genetic details that we talked about, the ears and the dental anomalies that they both shared. These features are so rare that the overlap is statistically significant. Yet, there is no known evidence Charles Webb ever met Joe. So how do we reconcile that? Either they had a secret relationship, someone else is Robin's father, but we still do not know who that is. The Somerton Man is not Webb, or the Somerton Man was related to Webb, but was not him specifically. The last option is the one that researchers started to whisper about. Genealogists match DNA, they don't necessarily match it to one person. It is absolutely possible that the Somerton Man was a relative of Webb, but potentially not Webb himself. So in that scenario, the DNA still points towards the Webb lineage. That would explain the ear and dental anomalies, the mystery travel, the espionage clues, and the fact that Webb's own history doesn't neatly match the case. But that leaves us with a new question then. If it wasn't Webb, who in that family was it? And why did they end up dead? And why did Joe react like she recognized him? So what does this DNA solve then? It's confirmed that the Somerton Man belonged to the Webb family line. It does not confirm his exact identity, his life story, his occupation, his connection to Joe, his cause of death, how the book got in the car, why the labels were removed, why he had American thread, why was he in Adelaide, and who poisoned him, if he was even poisoned, and why did he sit down on the beach and never get back up? In other words, DNA solved the who was he genetically question, but it did not solve the who was he personally. At its core, the Somerton Man case is a story about a man who seemed to arrive in Adelaide out of nowhere, carrying secrets no one could read, leaving no record of himself behind, and dying quietly, almost gracefully, in public. He left no name, no story, no explanation, just a message tucked inside a hidden pocket saying, "It is finished." But for us, it isn't. Not for investigators, not for genealogists, not for anyone who falls into this rabbit hole today. And definitely not for the listeners who made it to the end of this episode wondering, who was the Somerton Man? And what truth did he take with him when he finally closed his eyes on that beach? Thanks for listening to Cat Has Questions. If you liked this episode, follow the show and share it with someone who loves a good spiral. See you next week.